Hi everyone, this is just a quick video to help you how to answer question 5 in paper 1 of the EDUQAS GCSE English exam. Okay, so question 5 is the last question in paper 1 of the reading section. You do need to make sure that you leave yourself ample time to answer this question, and you should treat it like all the others. We need to give ourselves 15 minutes at least, because as you can see, it's another 10-mark question. So it's trying to make at least those 8 points with 8 different quotes to support. Now, what's different about question 5 is that it tells us to consider the passage as a whole. So that's good in a way that we don't have to worry about using the wrong lines, because we can take it from anywhere in the text. This is also good because some of the points you might have made in the previous questions, you could actually use again if they're relevant. Now, for this question, it's always a statement, and then it asks you how far you agree with it. Okay, so the statement is, Mason is clearly unwell and hallucinating when he sees the sea and the figure on the cliff. How far do you agree with this statement? So do you think that Mason is unwell and hallucinating everything he sees, or do you think it's real? Maybe there's some contradictions in this text, and actually some of it could be real, but some of it could not be. So maybe it's a bit of both. A good tip for you is to always try and see both sides. So try and agree and disagree if possible. And I think we can with this one, actually. I've been thinking about this question as we've been going through the text, and I actually think I've got some ideas already. Now, this question, again, like the last one, there's 2 bullet points to prompt you here. So it says you should consider your thoughts and feelings about Mason and what he sees and what he does. Yeah, fair enough. Let's highlight that one. And it also says how the writer is created those thoughts and feelings. So that's just another way of saying, if you want to talk about the writer's use of language or structure or tone or anything like that, go for it if you feel confident. As always, we've got to refer to the language used in the text and make sure that you use a, oops, I didn't mean to highlight that, sorry. Make sure you use a quote for every single point you make about whether you agree or disagree with the fact that he is unwell and hallucinating. Let's together read the end of the story and to see what happens, and then we'll consider the text as a whole, and then I'll write one example to start you off if you need it, and then you can carry on this answer yourself. So we got up to line 90 something, I believe it was 92 or 93 in the last one. So just to remind you, he tripped over a wooden railing, a cackle of chains and pulleys, he fell backwards into a gaping hole in the cliff, the sound of the sea booming in its hurtling darkness. Okay. After listening to the policeman's description, Professor Goodhart shook his head. I'm afraid not, Sergeant. We've been digging here all week and no one has fallen down the shaft. One of the flimsy wooden rails was swinging loosely in the crisp air. But thank you for warning me. I suppose we should build a heavier railing if this fellow is wandering around in his sleep. I don't imagine he would come up here, the sergeant said. It's quite a climb, but he has been missing for 2 days now. What are you digging for exactly? Apparently, there was an ancient sea here once, the professor offered. We found 2 skeletons yesterday, a man and a woman from the Triassic period, 2 fisher people who lived on the shore about 200 million years ago, before the sea dried up. The police sergeant smiled. Thanks for your time, Professor. Returning to the police car, the sergeant picked up Mason's crumpled flannel jacket. It smelled of brine. Okay, so that is the end of the short story of Now Wakes the Sea by J.G. Ballard. Hopefully you've inferred and you've understood what has happened to Mason. If you haven't, you might want to give the text a read again. Maybe go through the videos again if you want to listen to me reading it. There were some clues in there earlier on. I've just noticed something here about Mason's flannel jacket that is referred to earlier on. And this idea of brine seems to be all the way through this. And those things I think are quite relevant for this question we're looking at now, remember, which is Mason is clearly unwell and hallucinating when he sees the sea and the figure on the cliff. How far do you agree with this statement? Now, I can say I both agree and disagree with that statement, but I'm actually only going to give you one example. I'm going to let you do the rest of them. I'm sure we will share the mark scheme with you, the answers that we would have given to those of you who would like to see them. Okay, so this is everything that we've highlighted so far as we've been going through the answers, going through the questions together. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the text, and I'm going to think about what I remember reading here and what I remember highlighting in terms of do I agree or disagree with that statement. And I think the first thing is that I agree, because when I come back to this and his wife says, Mason, the nearest sea is 1,000 miles away, go out into the drive and look, there's no sea. It's quite clear there, isn't it? The implication is quite clear that he's either sleepwalking and he's dreaming it, or he definitely does have some sort of illness where he is perhaps seeing things that aren't there, hallucinating possibly, as our question says. So I think I'm going to use that one again. I could use the same quote, Mason, the nearest sea is 1,000 miles away, or I could use this one, go out into the drive and look, there's no sea. There's also other quotes that I could use here. The fact that Mason, Miriam's voice suddenly became loud. She's obviously very frustrated there, isn't she, at the fact that she thinks this isn't real, but he does. And I also noticed something else about Mason still convalescing from an illness which had kept him at home for the previous 6 months. Now, we don't know what that illness is, but that is probably a good piece of evidence there to suggest that he is clearly unwell. Convalescing, for anybody that's not sure, just means recovering. So he's still recovering from an illness. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to go back to question, it was the one about their relationship, I think. Yeah, so firstly, I get the impression that Miriam doesn't believe Mason when he says he's seen the sea, because she states, Mason, the nearest sea is 1,000 miles away. Now, that can be a quote and a point that I use for question 5. So I'm going to steal it. And I can steal it because in an exam situation, a different examiner marks every single one of your questions. So if you want to repeat things, you can do. Nobody's going to know. I am, however, just going to change how it's worded. So, firstly, I'm going to put, I agree that Mason is hallucinating, seeing the sea, because, I'm just going to take that out, because Miriam doesn't believe him. So firstly, I agree that Mason is hallucinating, seeing the sea, because Miriam doesn't believe him. As she states, Mason, the nearest sea, is 1,000 miles away. That is going to be my first point. Secondly, I then might go on to say, I also agree that Mason is unwell because, and I could possibly use that quote there, he was still convalescing from an illness that he'd had previously. However, I could say, however, I disagree, because Mason is very, very hell-bent on actually that this is real. Okay, it says he has complete conviction in the C's reality. He's convinced of its absolute validity. There's lots of things in there that make us believe that he is telling the truth. It could be things like the fact that it's so real in the way that it's described. When he describes what the phone's like, when he describes the sounds and the smell, that smell of brine, definitely. There's lots and lots of things in here that you can talk about, definitely. Okay, so make sure that you give it another read through and highlight anything you think supports you agree with the fact that he's unwell and hallucinating, or perhaps you disagree with that. Try and do a bit of both if possible. Remember, it's a 10-mark question, question 5. So you want to spend at least 15 minutes on it. So my advice would be to set your 15-minute timer on your phone and try and answer the rest of that question.